The courtroom doors swing open. But this isn't about justice. It's about survival. Coraline Thorne is fighting for her freedom from a man who promised her the world, but gave her a gilded cage. He's rich, powerful, and dangerously charming. But in 1 second, he's about to make the biggest mistake of his life. He's about to show the courtroom, and the world, the monster he keeps hidden behind closed doors. What he doesn't know is that the man sitting in the high chair, the man holding the gavel, is the one person he never, ever should have crossed. The silence in the Denver mansion was a specific kind of silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was the held-breath quiet of a forest waiting for the predator. Coraline Thorne, she still used his name for now, stood in the marble entryway, her hand frozen on the cold brass handle of the front door. And where? A voice, smooth as velvet, slid down the curved staircase. "Do you think you're going?" Coraline flinched, a movement so practiced it was barely perceptible. She turned, forcing a placid smile. "Just to the gallery, Vian. I told you, my friend Amelia has a new exhibit." Vian Thorne descended the stairs. He was a handsome man, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, his dark hair perfectly coiffed. To the city of Denver, he was a titan of real estate, a philanthropist, a self-made man. To Coraline, he was her architect, her builder, and her jailer. He stopped 1 step above her, a tactic he used to maintain his physical advantage. He tilted his head. "Amelia, right. The artist." He tasted the word like it was spoiled. "I looked at your calendar. It wasn't on there. It was last minute. I was just—" "You know the rule, Coraline. We share a calendar for a reason. So I know where you are. For your safety, of course." He smiled, but it never reached his cold, grey eyes. I'm going. It's a public gallery." Her voice was a mouse squeak. Vian stepped down, closing the space between them. He didn't raise his voice. He never did, not at first. He gently took her car keys from her hand. "You're flushed, darling. You're not well. You've been stressed. I think you should stay home. Rest." "Vianna, please, I'm fine. I want to see my friend." "Your friend," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "is a distraction. She's putting foolish ideas in your head, like that little job you wanted." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "A curator. As if you need to work. You have everything here." He gestured to the vast, empty opulence, the priceless art he'd chosen, the designer furniture he'd approved, the staff he'd hired. "This isn't a life, Vian," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "It's a display." His eyes hardened. He didn't move, but the air crackled. "You're ungrateful." "I'm not. I want to be me again." "Be you." He traced her jawline with 1 finger, his touch cold. "Who were you before me? A grieving college girl whose father had just disowned her. I gave you this name. I gave you this life. Don't you ever forget who you belong to." The disowned part was the knife he twisted daily. It was true, in a way. Her father, Judge Arthur Hayes, a man of rigid principles and an iron will, had despised Vian on sight. "He's a predator, Coraline," he'd warned her, his voice echoing in his stern, mahogany-panelled study. "He's all surface, no substance. He collects things, and he wants to collect you." She, blinded by Vian's charm and desperate for an anchor after her mother's passing, had seen her father's warning as control. She'd accused him of a lifetime of judgment. The fight had been catastrophic. She'd screamed, "I'm marrying him, and if you can't be happy for me, then I don't have a father." She hadn't spoken to Arthur Hayes in 6 years. Vian had made sure of it, slowly, expertly, isolating her, painting her father as the villain. the one who abandoned her. Now in the hallway, Vian leaned in, his breath warm on her ear. "Call Amelia. Tell her you're ill. And then, I want you to go to our room and wait for me. We need to discuss your attitude." Tears pricked her eyes, hot and humiliating. She nodded, the fight draining out of her. She was a doll, and he held the strings. "Good girl," he murmured, kissing her forehead before turning to straighten his tie in the hall mirror. Coraline watched his reflection. The final straw wasn't a scream or a hit. It was a click, the click of her phone as she pretended to dial Amelia and instead opened a browser. She typed, "Denver divorce lawyers pro bono." She couldn't use their joint accounts. He monitored every cent. He called it financial planning. She called it a leash. That night, after he'd given her a cold, calculated lecture on loyalty, and then demanded his rights as a husband, she waited until his breathing deepened into sleep. She crept to the guest bathroom, pulled a loose tile from behind the shower, and retrieved a burner phone and a small stash of cash she'd been skimming for a year, one $20 bill at a time. She made the call. A woman named Sarah Jenkins, whose office was a small, cluttered room above a bakery, agreed to see her. The next 3 weeks were a blur of secret meetings, whispered phone calls, and terrifying, meticulous planning. Sarah was young but sharp. "He's a classic narcissist with extreme coercive control, Coraline. The court sees this, but you need proof. He's hidden all the assets, I guarantee it. This is going to be brutal." "I don't want the money," Coraline said, her hands shaking as she held a cup of lukewarm tea. "I just want out. To get out, you need to be safe. We file for a temporary restraining order and an emergency hearing for financial support. He will fight back. He will try to destroy you." The day the papers were served, Vian was at a charity gala. Coraline was already gone, hidden in a small, anonymous apartment Sarah had found. Vian didn't call her. He called his lawyer. And then he sent Coraline a single text message. Not to her burner, but to her old phone, which she'd left on the nightstand. She'd driven back in a panic, fearing she'd left something crucial. The phone was there, and on its screen, a message that made her blood run cold. It was just 6 words. "You have no idea what you've done." The apartment Sarah Jenkins found for Coraline was on the other side of Denver, a 3rd-floor walk-up that smelled of old carpet and fried onions. It was the safest place Coraline had been in 6 years. The complex, The Regent, was a faded beige box, anonymous and populated by people rushing to and from hourly jobs, none of whom would look twice at a pale woman in sunglasses and a baseball cap. Coraline spent the first 48 hours in a state of vibrating terror. Every footstep in the hall, every car door slamming in the lot below, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. Vian was a hunter. He wouldn't just be angry, he would be insulted. She had damaged his property. She had embarrassed him. Her lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, was her only lifeline. Sarah was everything Vian detested: smart, independent, and unimpressed by money. She wore sensible shoes, and her brown hair was always pulled back in a slightly messy bun. "Okay, Coraline," Sarah said, sitting on the apartment's lumpy sofa. She'd brought a box of files and a bag of bagels. He's responded. As expected, he's not going to roll over. Coraline clutched her mug of tea. What did he say? His lawyer, a real shark from Thorne, Miller and Lynch. Yes, he's a partner, of course he is. Filed a response. They claim you are emotionally unstable and prone to hysterical fantasies. They are petitioning to have your restraining order thrown out and demanding you return to the marital home. "Return? He'll kill me." "He won't," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Not literally. He's too smart for that. but he will break you. Our job is to make sure that doesn't happen. The hearing for the TRO is in 3 days. Division 12. Judge Alistair Black. Wait, I thought you said... Coraline's mind raced. You said Judge Black was on medical leave. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. He was. He was supposed to be out for another month, but his replacement, a visiting judge, had a family emergency. So the chief judge had to reshuffle the docket. We got reassigned. Reassigned? To who? Sarah checked her notes. A Judge Arthur Hayes. He's usually in the 2nd district, mostly criminal, but he's covering the domestic docket. He's got a reputation. Tough. By the book. No patience for games. Frankly, it's probably good for us. He won't be impressed by Vianne's money. Coraline's mug slipped. Tea splashed onto her hand, scalding hot, but she didn't feel it. The world tilted, a high-pitched whine filling her ears. Arthur Hayes. Coraline? Coraline, are you okay? You're as white as a sheet. My father. That's my father. Sarah's pen clattered to the floor. What? Are you serious? Arthur Hayes is your father. Coraline nodded, her body numb. We're estranged. We haven't spoken since before the wedding. 6 years. He doesn't know any of this. Sarah's legal mind was spinning. This is a massive conflict of interest. He'll have to recuse himself. The second he sees the case name Thorne via Thorne, he'll know. Or, wait, your maiden name is Hayes. He might not make the connection until he sees you. He'll recuse himself, Coraline whispered, the reality crashing in. We'll get reassigned. It'll be delayed. Vianne will find me. Oh God, Sarah, this is a disaster. No, wait. Sarah held up a hand. Stop, let's think. This is Denver. Hayes is a common name. Thorne is not. He'll see Thorne v. Thorne. He has no reason to connect Coraline Thorne to Coraline Hayes, the daughter he hasn't seen in 6 years, who he thinks is living a life of luxury. He probably won't even read the affidavits until he's on the bench. But he'll see me, Coraline panted. Maybe. Maybe not. You'll be in the gallery, then at the plaintiff's table. He's on an elevated bench. He'll be focused on the lawyers. By the time he recognizes you, he'll recuse. But what if Vianne doesn't know? Know what? Who your father is? Did you ever tell him your dad was a judge? Coraline thought back through the fog of their early whirlwind romance. I think I said he was in government work, or legal. Vianne was never interested in my family. He only cared that I was cutting them off for him. He never met my father. Ever. He wouldn't know Arthur Hayes from Adam. A strange, dangerous stillness settled over Sarah. Okay, Coraline, this is a risk, a huge one. But it could also be an opportunity. What do you mean? The hearing is for the temporary restraining order. Vianne and his high-priced lawyer, Mr. Shaw, are going to walk in there, expecting a pushover judge they can charm. They're going to paint you as a gold-digging, hysterical woman. Vianne will put on his concerned husband face, and he'll do it with all the arrogance in the world. And we let him, Sarah said, a glint in her eye. We let him walk right into it. Your father is a fair man, right? By the book? To a fault, Coraline said bitterly. It's why we fought. His book didn't have room for a man like Vianne. Exactly. So he will be impartial. He won't give you special treatment. But he also won't be intimidated by Vianne Thorne. And he hates being lied to. We go in. We present our case. We show the judge the evidence of control. If he recuses himself, he recuses. We get a new date. But if Vianne pulls anything, if he shows even a fraction of the man you've described, in front of that judge, He'll be handing us the rope. Coraline's heart was a trapped bird in her ribs. It was insane. It was terrifying. But it was also the first spark of something other than fear she'd felt in years. It felt like fate. "Okay," Coraline whispered, her voice shaking. "Okay, we do it. We walk in." The morning of the hearing, a cold, sharp November wind whipped down from the Rockies. The Denver County Courthouse was an imposing block of granite, designed to make you feel small. Coraline felt microscopic. She wore the best poor outfit she owned, a simple black dress Sarah had bought for her from a thrift store, and a plain grey cardigan. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back. She'd lost so much weight that her wedding ring, the 5-carat diamond Vane called his investment, spun loosely on her finger. She had kept it on as evidence. Sarah met her at the metal detectors. "You okay?" "I'm going to be sick," Coraline breathed. "Deep breaths. Remember the plan. I do all the talking. You only speak if the judge addresses you directly. Answer yes or no. Be respectful. Be small. Be the victim. That's what we're here to prove you are." "Be small," Coraline repeated. "I can do that." They entered courtroom 3B. It was smaller than Coraline expected, panelled in dark wood, and smelled of floor wax and old paper. It was half full. Coraline and Sarah took the plaintiff's table on the left, and then he walked in. Vian Thorne looked like he owned the building. He wasn't in a suit. He was in a perfectly tailored cashmere blazer, dark trousers, and shoes that cost more than Coraline's apartment. He was flanked by a team of 3 lawyers, led by a silver-haired man, Mr. Shaw, who carried a briefcase that looked like it could survive a plane crash. Vian spotted Coraline. He didn't glower. He didn't smirk. He gave her a look of profound, aching disappointment. The "how could you do this to me" look he'd perfected. It was so effective, she almost believed him. He then sat down and began confidently chatting with Shaw, as if he were at a business brunch. "All rise." Coraline's stomach evaporated. She stood on trembling legs. A door to the side of the bench opened, and he walked out. Judge Arthur Hayes. He was older. The 6 years had been kind in some ways and cruel in others. His hair, once salt and pepper, was now almost entirely white. But his posture was the same, ramrod straight. The black robe settled on his broad shoulders as if it were armor. He carried an air of absolute, unassailable authority. Coraline's heart hammered. "He doesn't see me. He hasn't looked. He's looking at the papers." "Be seated," the bailiff said. "Calling the docket for Division 12, November 18th, 2025. Judge Arthur Hayes presiding." The clerk rattled off a few cases, and then, "Case 2025, DV 7724, Thorne versus Thorne, motion for temporary protection order." Coraline watched her father. His eyes scanned the file. There was no flicker of recognition. Thorne v. Thorne. It meant nothing to him. "Counsel, please state your appearances," the judge's voice boomed. It was the same voice that used to read her bedtime stories, the same voice that had yelled at her for breaking curfew. "Sarah Jenkins for the plaintiff. Coraline Thorne, Your Honor." "William Shaw for the defendant. Mr. Vian Thorne, Your Honor." Judge Hayes looked up, his gaze sweeping first over Sarah, then over Shaw. His eyes passed over Vian. Then, for one brief, agonizing second, they landed on Coraline. Nothing. No recognition. Just a blank, judicial stare. She was just another face, another broken woman in his courtroom. The relief was so profound, Coraline nearly wept. But it was also a new kind of pain. He truly didn't know her. "Ms. Jenkins," the judge said, his tone clipped. "This is a motion for a TRO. You're alleging domestic abuse, coercive control, and financial imprisonment. A heavy set of claims. Please proceed." "Thank you, Your Honor." Sarah stood, calm and professional. My client, Coraline Thorne, has been married to the defendant for 6 years. In that time, Mr. Thorne has systematically isolated her from friends and family, seized control of all financial assets, and created an environment of constant surveillance and fear. We are asking for the TRO to be made permanent, for exclusive use of the apartment my client is now hiding in, and for emergency spousal support so she can eat. Vian scoffed, a tiny dismissive sound. Judge Hayes's head snapped up. "Mr. Thorne, did you have something to add?" Vian's lawyer, Mr. Shaw, shot up. "No, Your Honor. My client is simply distressed by these falsehoods." "He will remain distressed in silence, Mr. Shaw, or he can wait in the hall." "Understood." "Yes, Your Honor," Shaw said, glaring at Vian. "Proceed, Miss Jenkins." Sarah laid it out. The phone monitoring, the calendar rules, the locked bank accounts, the way Vian had fired her one friend who worked at a gallery with her. It was a textbook case of control. Then it was Shaw's turn. "Your Honor, this is a fabrication, a fantasy. Mr. Thorne is a respected member of the community. What Miss Jenkins describes is not control, it's concern." "Mrs. Thorne," he said, gesturing to Coraline, "has a history of instability. She is delicate. After a tragic estrangement from her family, she became withdrawn. Mr. Thorne has done nothing but try to protect her." "He's not protecting her, Your Honor. He's imprisoning her," Sarah countered. "Objection," Shaw thundered. "Inflammatory." "Sustained," Judge Hayes said, his face a mask of stone. "Miss Jenkins, stick to the facts." "The fact, Your Honor, is that my client is terrified. Mr. Thorne's behavior is not just controlling, it's threatening." Shaw laughed. "Threatening? Your Honor, my client has never, not once, laid a hand on his wife. Is that not correct, Miss Jenkins? Is there any allegation of physical violence in your motion?" Sarah hesitated. "No, Your Honor, but then what are we doing here?" Shaw spread his hands wide. "This is a domestic violence court, not a my husband is mean court. This is a waste of the court's time. Mr. Thorne wants his wife to come home so they can work this out. He loves her very much." Vian put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking in a perfect pantomime of a grieving husband. Coraline felt the case slipping. Her father, the judge, looked impatient. He was a man who dealt in black and white, assault, theft, hard evidence. Coercive control was a grey fog he couldn't grasp. "Ms. Jenkins," the judge said, his voice flat, "Mr. Shaw has a point. Your allegations are serious, but they lack concrete proof. I see no police reports, no medical records. I see a joint bank account statement that shows Mr. Thorne gives his wife a $5,000 a month allowance." "Which he tracks, Your Honor," Sarah said. "She has to submit receipts." "This is thin," Judge Hayes said, closing the file. "I am not inclined to grant this. I'm going to order you both to mediation." "Your Honor!" Coraline stood up. "Coraline, no!" Sarah whispered, pulling at her sleeve. But it was too late. Everyone was looking at her. Vian, Shaw, and her father. Judge Hayes's eyes narrowed. "The plaintiff will be silent and let her counsel speak." "He's lying," Coraline said, her voice shaking but clear. "He's lying about everything. He's not concerned. He's a monster." Vian stood up slowly, his face a mask of pure fury. "Coraline, sit down. You are embarrassing yourself." "Mr. Thorne, sit down," Judge Hayes commanded. "She's unwell, Your Honor. You can see it," Vian yelled, pointing at her. "She needs help, the help I can provide." "Bailiff!" "I have proof," Coraline said, her hand diving into her purse. She pulled out her burner phone. "I have a recording." The courtroom went silent. "A recording?" Judge Hayes's voice cut through the silence. His eyes were fixed on Coraline, a flicker of something, annoyance, or perhaps intrigue, in them. Mr. Shaw was on his feet instantly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is classic trial by ambush. We have no prior discovery of this supposed evidence. It's inadmissible." "Ms. Jenkins?" the judge asked, his gaze shifting to Sarah. Sarah, recovering quickly, stood. "Your Honor, this recording was made by my client 24 hours before she fled her home. It was made in fear for her life. We haven't had a chance to formally submit it, as we were focused on her immediate physical safety. But it directly rebuts Mr. Shaw's claim that my client is unstable and that Mr. Thorne is merely concerned." Judge Hayes steepled his fingers, staring at Coraline. "And what does this recording contain, Mrs. Thorne?" Coraline's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. It's from last month, when I asked if I could volunteer at the children's hospital." Vian, who had been standing, slowly sat down. A shadow passed over his face. He knew the recording. He knew exactly what was on it. "Objection," Shaw tried again. "This is a violation of wiretapping statutes. Was my client aware he was being recorded?" "Colorado is a one-party consent state, Mr. Shaw. I'm sure you know that," Judge Hayes said, his voice laced with acid. "I'll allow it. Ms. Jenkins, bring the device to the clerk. We'll play it over the system." "No," Vian said. It wasn't a shout. It was a guttural command. Judge Hayes ignored him. Sarah took the phone from Coraline's trembling hand and gave it to the bailiff, who plugged it into the courtroom's audio system. Sarah pressed play. At first, there was just a rustle. Then, Coraline's voice, tentative. "I just think it would be good for me, to get out, to help." Then, Vian's voice. It was not the smooth, charming voice the court had heard. It was a low, venomous growl that made the air in the room turn cold. "Help! You want to help? You are a piece of decoration, Coraline. You are an asset. You are my wife. You will not be seen scrubbing floors or wiping noses like some common... You will be here. You will be beautiful. And you will be silent. Do you know what I did to get this life? Do you have any idea the things I've done? You will not ruin it for me by playing commoner. If I ever hear you mention this again, I will take you to that clinic in Switzerland, the one for exhaustion, and I will leave you there. I will tell them you are suicidal. I will tell them you are insane. And they will believe me, because I am Vian Thorne. And you are nothing. You are nobody. You don't even have a family anymore." The recording clicked off. A heavy, toxic silence filled the courtroom. Mr. Shaw was staring at his legal pad, his face pale. The clerk looked ill. Judge Hayes was completely, utterly still. He was staring at Vian Thorne, his face carved from ice. He hadn't looked at Coraline. Not once. Coraline, breathing heavily, finally looked at her husband. Vian was no longer the charming philanthropist. His mask was gone. His face was a dark, mottled red. His eyes were not on the judge. They were locked on Coraline. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, a look that promised retribution. "So," Judge Hayes said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That is your concern, Mr. Thorne." Before Shaw could even think to object, Vian stood. He moved with a speed that was terrifying. He took 2 long strides towards the plaintiff's table. "You bitch!" he hissed. Sarah jumped up. "Your Honor!" The bailiff moved, but Vian was faster. He was not aiming for Sarah. He was aiming for Coraline. He didn't punch her. He did what he always did. He asserted his control. He raised his hand and slapped her, hard, across the face. The sound was a sickening crack that echoed in the stunned silence of the courtroom. Coraline stumbled back, her chair crashing to the floor. The side of her face exploded in white-hot pain. She fell against the bar, gasping. Time stopped. The bailiff, a big man named Officer Riley, shouted, "No!" and lunged, grabbing Vian from behind in a bear hug. Mr. Shaw dropped his pen. Sarah screamed, and Judge Arthur Hayes rose from his chair. He didn't shout, he didn't bang his gavel, he just rose to his full, imposing height, his face a thundercloud of pure, divine wrath. Vian was struggling against the bailiff, his eyes still fixed on Coraline, his chest heaving. "You're dead!" he screamed at her. "You are dead!" "Officer Riley," Judge Hayes said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a diamond. "Put that man in restraints. Now." "Yes, sir." The bailiff and his partner, who had just burst through the side door, slammed Vian face first onto the defendant's table, clearing files in a rush. They cuffed his hands behind his back with brutal efficiency. "This is an outrage," Vian bellowed, his voice muffled by the wood. "You can't do this. I am Vian Thorne. Shaw, do something." Mr. Shaw looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Your Honor, my client, he's distraught." Judge Hayes slammed his gavel down. Once. The sound was like a gunshot. Bang. The courtroom fell into absolute, terrified silence. Even Vian stopped struggling. Judge Hayes pointed a shaking finger at Vian Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You have just in a court of law, in front of multiple witnesses and officers of said court, committed aggravated battery and assault." He then looked at his clerk. "Madam Clerk, please note the time. Please also note the defendant's multiple threats against the plaintiff." He turned his gaze back to Vian, who was now being hauled to his feet by the bailiffs, his expensive blazer ripped. "You, sir," the judge continued, "are a fool. You are an arrogant, narcissistic fool. You walked into my courtroom believing your name and your money would protect you." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the room, before they landed, finally, on Coraline. Coraline was on her feet, holding her hand to her bright red cheek, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't crying from the pain. She was crying because, for the first time, she wasn't looking at a judge. She was looking at her father, and her father was looking back at her. The judicial mask was gone, replaced by a look of such profound, agonizing recognition and protective fury that it took her breath away. "You came in here," Judge Hayes said, his voice now cracking with a carefully controlled emotion, "and you slandered this woman. You called her unstable. You called her a liar." He looked at Vian, his eyes black pools of rage. "You, Mr. Thorne, have no idea what you've done." He used Vian's own words against him. "Your Honor, please," Shaw begged. "A misunderstanding. The stress." "Silence, Mr. Shaw. You can speak at your client's arraignment." He looked at the bailiffs. "Officer Riley, take Mr. Thorne to holding. He is remanded without bail on charges of aggravated assault, battery, and contempt of court." A lot of contempt. "You can't do this," Vian shrieked as they dragged him toward the door. "You don't know who I am." Judge Arthur Hayes leaned over the bench. His voice was low, but every person in the room heard him. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Mr. Thorne. You're the man who just slapped my daughter." The courtroom held its breath. Mr. Shaw's jaw unhinged. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keys. Vian, halfway through the holding door, stopped struggling and turned, his face a mask of complete, horrified disbelief. "You're... what?" Vian whispered. Judge Hayes looked at Coraline, his expression softening for one fraction of a second before hardening again as he addressed the room. "This court is in recess," he announced, his voice shaking with restrained adrenaline. "And I am, as of this moment, recusing myself from case 2025 DV 7774 on the grounds of a profound and undeniable personal conflict." He looked at the still frozen Mr. Shaw. "Counselor, you and I will be having a conversation with the Bar Association about your client's performance. As for you, Mr. Thorne," he locked eyes with Vian. "You will be arraigned this afternoon on the new criminal charges in front of another judge. Get him out of my sight." The bailiffs didn't hesitate. They hauled a non-responsive, shell-shocked Vian Thorne through the door, which slammed shut with a final, echoing thud. The room exploded. People in the gallery were whispering, a buzz of, "Did he say?" and "His daughter?" Judge Hayes struck his gavel 3 times. "Order! Order! This court is clear!" He didn't wait. He turned and strode through the door to his chambers, his black robe billowing behind him. Coraline was still standing, her legs feeling like water. Sarah Jenkins, her own shock apparent, grabbed Coraline's arm. "Come on. Let's get you out of here. We need ice for your face." "No," Coraline whispered. I have to see him." She walked, as if in a trance, past the plaintiff's table, past the bar, and pushed open the same door her father had just disappeared through. "Coraline, you can't!" Sarah called, but the bailiff, Officer Riley, simply stepped aside, his expression one of deep, human pity. The judge's chambers were not what she expected. They were sparse, functional. A large desk, walls of law books, and a single framed photo on the credenza. It was Coraline at age 16, on a horse, smiling, her arm around her mother. Arthur Hayes was standing at the window, his back to her, his hands gripping the sill so hard his knuckles were white. The robe was still on, a symbol of an authority that now seemed so fragile. "Dad!" The word was a tiny, broken sound. She hadn't said it in 6 years. He didn't turn. His shoulders hitched. Once, twice. "You should have come to me, Coraline," he said, his voice thick. "Why didn't you come to me?" You told me I'd made my bed," she whispered, the memory of their last, terrible fight fresh as the sting on her cheek. "You told me if I married him, I was on my own." "I was a fool," he said, his voice ragged. He turned around, and the sight of him broke her. The stoic, iron-willed judge was gone. Her father's eyes were red, tears streaming unchecked down his face. "I was a proud, stubborn, stupid fool. I was trying to scare you, to protect you. I thought if I was hard enough, you'd see. I never thought." He saw her cheek, the angry red welt now darkening to a bruise. His face crumpled. "Oh, Coraline. Laney." He used his childhood name for her. "What did he do to you? What has that animal done to you?" She ran to him. The last 6 years of pain, isolation, and terror dissolved as his arms, the arms that had taught her to ride a bike and held her after her mother's funeral, wrapped around her. She buried her face in the rough wool of his robe and sobbed, a raw, primal wail of grief and relief. Here. She couldn't form the words. "Shh, shh," he said, stroking her hair. "It's okay. You're safe. I've got you. He will never, ever touch you again. I swear on your mother's grave, Coraline, he will never touch you again." They stood there for a long time, the sounds of the courthouse fading away, leaving only the sound of a father and daughter reconnecting across a 6-year chasm of pain. Finally, Arthur pulled back, holding her at arm's length. He looked at her, really looked at her. The haunted eyes, the hollows in her cheeks, the bruise. His fury returned, cold and focused. "Sarah Jenkins," he said, his voice back to its judicial tone. "She's your lawyer?" Coraline nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes. She's the only one. She's out of her depth. She's a good family lawyer, but she's not a shark. Vian Thorne is a shark, and he's just been wounded. He's going to come back at you with everything. His lawyers will try to bury you." "What do we do?" Coraline asked, the old fear creeping back. Arthur Hayes walked to his desk and picked up his phone. "We get you a shark of our own." He dialed a number. "Ben?" "It's Arthur Hayes. I'm good. Listen, I'm calling in that favor. The one you've owed me since the Miller case. Yes, it's my daughter. She's in trouble. She needs the best." He listened for a moment, a grim smile touching his lips. "Benjamin Carter. He's the best forensic accounting and corporate litigator in the state. He normally defends monsters like Thorne. Now he's going to tear one down." He hung up the phone and looked at Coraline. "This is just the beginning. The assault charge will stick. He did that in front of 30 people and a judge. But the divorce, that's where he'll hide. He's hidden his money. That recording proved he's a monster. Now we have to prove he's a criminal." "Dad, that recording, he said he'd done things to get his life." "What did he mean?" Arthur's eyes narrowed. "That, my dear, is what Benjamin Carter is going to find out. Vian Thorne wanted to own you. He wanted to collect you. He just found out that some people are not for sale, and they are not without family. Benjamin." Ben Carter was not a lawyer. He was a surgeon. He didn't argue a case. He dissected it, found the disease, and cut it out with ruthless precision. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with a mind that moved so fast his words often hurried to catch up. He met Coraline and Arthur in a secure conference room at his opulent downtown law office. "Judge Hayes," Ben said, shaking his hand firmly. "Coraline, I'm sorry for the circumstances, but I'm glad to be of service." He looked at Coraline's face. The bruise was a sickening purple and yellow. "Ms. Jenkins has forwarded her files. She did good work. She got you out. My job is to make sure you stay out, and that you leave with everything you are owed." "I don't want his money, Mr. Carter," Coraline said quietly. "With respect, Coraline, this isn't about his money. It's about your money. And more importantly, it's about leverage. Vian Thorne's entire world is built on two things, power and perception. His perception is ruined. The slap, it's all over the legal community. The judge's daughter, he's a pariah, but his power, that comes from his finances. We take that. We take him. Vian, meanwhile, had made bail. The assault charge was a felony, but his lawyers, a new, even more expensive criminal defense team, had argued he was not a flight risk. He was out, wearing an ankle monitor, and his fury was biblical. He was also, as Ben Carter predicted, hiding everything. He's filed for bankruptcy protection on 2 of his major holding companies, Ben reported a week later, sliding a thick file across the table. He's claiming his assets are all tied up in trusts, that he's liquid poor. He's painting you as the profligate wife whose spending ruined him. And this TRO is a desperate, last-ditch attempt to get a payout. But he's worth hundreds of millions, Coraline said, stunned. On paper, Ben said, tapping the file. But paper burns. My forensic team has been digging. For the last 6 years, Vian hasn't just been building skyscrapers. He's been building a labyrinth. That recording, Arthur said, leaning forward. Coraline, the one from the courtroom. Do you know what I did to get this life? We've been focusing on that, Ben said. We pulled the incorporation papers for Thorne Global. It was founded 7 years ago. His seed money. It's listed as an inheritance from a distant relative. We checked. The relative doesn't exist. So where did the money come from? Coraline asked. We didn't know, until my investigator, a wonderful woman named Maria, noticed something. A name that appeared on the original charter, then disappeared. Williamson. It didn't mean anything until we cross-referenced it with Vian's old college records. His roommate, his best friend. A young man named Peter Williamson. Ben slid a photograph across the table. It was Vian, younger, arm in arm with a smiling, sandy-haired young man. Peter Williamson, Ben continued, was a genius, a software engineer. He came from a very, very wealthy family. In his senior year of college, just before Vian founded his company, Peter, tragically, died in a hiking accident. Fell from a cliff in Utah. Coraline felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Was Vian with him? He was, Ben said. He was the only witness. He bravely hiked for miles to get a signal and call for help. He was the sole beneficiary of Peter's will, a document Peter had apparently signed just 1 week before his death, leaving his entire tech portfolio and trust fund valued at $50 million to his dearest friend, Vian Thorne. The Williamson family fought it. They claimed undue influence. But Vian, charming as ever, settled. He gave them half, and he kept $25 million. My God, Arthur whispered. That was his seed money, Ben said. He didn't inherit it. He acquired it. Are you saying he killed him? Coraline's voice was barely audible. I'm saying the circumstances are criminally convenient, Ben said darkly. And it gets worse. That $25 million wasn't enough. He used it as collateral to launch a series of fraudulent real estate ventures. He was running a classic Ponzi scheme, taking money from new investors to pay off the old ones, all while living like a king. The entire Thorne global empire. It's a house of cards, and you, Coraline, were the queen he put on top of it. Coraline finally understood. The control, the isolation, the terror of her ruining it for him. He wasn't afraid I'd leave him, she said, the realization dawning. He was afraid I'd talk, afraid I'd stumble onto what he was. He kept me locked up, not because he was afraid I'd find another man, but because he was afraid I'd find an accountant. Exactly, Ben said. And the slap. That wasn't just anger. That was panic. You brought an unauthorized recording into a court of law. He thought, what else does she have? What else does she know? He lost control because he saw his entire world, the fraud, the lies, maybe even the murder, flashing before his eyes. So what now? Arthur asked. Now, Ben said, a thin, cruel smile on his face. We have him. The divorce is the least of his worries. I'm handing this file over to the U.S. Attorney's office, and I'm handing it to the Williamson family, who have been trying to get justice for their son for 7 years. Vian Thorne is about to be fighting a war on 3 fronts: the domestic assault, the divorce, and a federal investigation for fraud and wrongful death. Coraline looked at her father. His face was grim, but his eyes were proud. He said I was nothing, Coraline said to Ben. He said I was nobody. He said I didn't even have a family anymore. Well, Ben Carter said, closing his briefcase. He was wrong about that. The next 6 months were a blur of depositions, federal indictments, and front-page news. Denver Titan Vian Thorne arrested for massive fraud. Thorne empire crumbles. Questions arise over death of college friend. The assault trial was swift, with 30 witnesses, including 2 bailiffs and a judge, who testified as a civilian to what he saw before his recusal. It took the jury 45 minutes. Vian Thorne was found guilty of aggravated assault and battery. He was sentenced to 2 years, but the judge postponed the sentence pending the outcome of the federal fraud trial. That was where Ben Carter truly shone. The federal trial was a slaughter. Ben, working with the U.S. Attorney and the Williamson family's lawyers, unraveled Vian's entire life. The Ponzi scheme was exposed, wiping out his fabricated fortune. Investors, once his friends, testified against him, but the most compelling witness was Coraline. She walked into the courtroom, not as the trembling victim in a thrift store cardigan, but as Coraline Hayes. She wore a smart navy blue suit, her hair cut in a professional bob. She looked strong. The prosecutor walked her through her life with Vian, the isolation, the control, the threats. "And then what happened, Miss Hayes?" the prosecutor asked. "And then," Coraline said, her voice clear and strong, "he threatened to have me committed if I ever tried to have a life of my own. He told me I was nothing. He told me he'd done things to get his life, and I would not ruin it." "And you believed him?" "Yes. I was terrified." Then, Vian's defense attorney, a new man who looked exhausted, stood up for cross-examination. "Ms. Hayes, isn't it true you were angry? Estranged from your father, desperate for money? Isn't it true you fabricated this entire story of control to get a bigger divorce settlement?" Coraline looked him in the eye. "I didn't have a divorce settlement. I filed with a pro bono lawyer. I fled my home with $80 and a burner phone. I wasn't after his money. I was after my life. And this slap in the courtroom. You provoked him, didn't you? You brought in an illegal recording. It was not illegal. And I did not provoke him. I exposed him. He did the rest himself." "You hate him, don't you?" the lawyer pressed. Coraline paused. She looked for the first time at Vian. He was sitting at the defense table, a broken man. He'd aged 20 years. His charisma was gone, replaced by a sullen, desperate fear. "No," Coraline said, her voice softening. "I don't hate him. I pity him. He had to build an empire of lies to feel like a man. He had to trap a woman to feel strong. He had to threaten and steal to feel rich. He wasn't a titan. He was just a hollow, terrified man. And I'm not his victim anymore." She turned to the jury. "I'm a survivor." The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty on all counts of fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The judge, citing the extreme and predatory nature of his crimes, sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison. The assault sentence would be served concurrently. The Williamson family, while never getting a murder conviction, had gotten justice. Vian would die in prison. As he was led out in handcuffs, his eyes met Coraline's. There was no hatred left, just a vast, empty void. Coraline walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight, where her father, Arthur Hayes, was waiting for her. He wasn't a judge today. He was just a dad. "It's over, Laney," he said, opening his arms. She hugged him. "It's over." She got the divorce. There was no money to get. The government and the defrauded investors seized everything. She didn't care. Coraline Hayes went back to school. She got her master's in art history, then her PhD. She didn't just become a curator. She opened her own gallery, a gallery dedicated to supporting struggling female artists, women with a voice who needed a platform. She and her father, Arthur, rebuilt their relationship. The rigidity and the rebellion were gone, replaced by a quiet, deep understanding. They had dinner every Sunday. Coraline never forgot the terror of her gilded cage, but she no longer lived in its shadow. She had found her voice in the one place she feared most, and in front of the one man she thought she had lost forever. The gavel had fallen, not just on Vian, but on her old life, setting her free. And so, Vian Thorne, a man who built an empire on lies and ruled his home with fear, found his new home in a concrete cell. Coraline, finally free, rediscovered not just her life, but the family he stole from her. Her story is a powerful reminder that no matter how dark the night gets, the truth will find its light. And sometimes, justice isn't just blind. It's watching, waiting, and wearing a judge's robe. What did you think of Coraline's journey? Do you believe karma found its mark? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama and powerful stories of justice. Your support helps us keep telling them.